Sorvath's claw was still resting on the display when the hull changed color for the third time. Not a flicker, not a trick of the containment field's lighting. The obsidian skin of the derelict vessel shifted from matte black to a faint, oily blue, and there was no light source in the chamber that could account for it. He did not touch the panel again. He watched, and he counted the drift of it in his head, the way he had counted every anomaly for the last 187 years, ever since the habit of tapping his claw against a work surface had settled into him as something closer to instinct than choice. He had never seen a material do that. Behind him, boots struck the obsidian floor in a rhythm that did not slow down for anyone, not even for a room full of people who had learned to go quiet when they heard it. Admiral Dravon Vex did not ask permission to stand at Sorvath's shoulder. He never had. Not in the 6 years they had worked in the same wing of the facility. Not once. "What does it do?" Vex said. Sorvath did not answer right away. The vessel hung inside the containment frame like something asleep, small and unarmed and wrong in a way he could not yet put into words that would satisfy either of them. It had drifted alone in the obsidian reach for 3 centuries, and by every law of physics the Imperium had ever written down, it should have been dust and radiation scattered by now. "It's 340 years old," Sorvath said finally. Carpent dating and the hull decay both agree. That puts it at the exact year of first contact with the humans. Vex's yellow eyes narrowed to slits, the way they did whenever a fact refused to sit where he wanted it. "The Imperium is 9,000 years old, Doctor." That single fact was the whole foundation everyone standing in this chamber had built their careers on. It has survived worse than an empty ship. The Vorthani Imperium had existed for 9,000 years. It had never been wrong. And it was the reason nobody but Sorvath seemed to have noticed yet that the reading scrolling across his display did not correspond to any physical process on record. Not decay, not power drain, not structural fatigue, nothing. Just numbers that refused to mean anything. He tapped his left claw 3 times against the console, an old habit he no longer felt himself performing. Then he saw the second thing wrong, and his hand went still against the cold metal. "There's no seam," he said. Vex turned his head, slow and deliberate, the same motion he used on subordinates before he decided whether they deserved his patience. "Every hull has a seam, a hatch, an access point. I've breached 43 worlds, Doctor." "There's always a door." "Not on this one." Sorvath pulled the scan wider. "Let the ship's full outline fill the display between them. Smooth from bow to stern, unbroken. No hinge line anywhere, no plating gap, nothing but a single continuous surface, 2.3 centimeters thick, as if the entire vessel had been grown rather than built by hands or machines. It isn't assembled, Admiral. It's one piece." Behind Vex, 3 junior analysts had stopped pretending to work at their own stations and were watching the display too, and none of them said a word. All of it. For a moment neither of them spoke, because the silence in the room had already answered a question none of them wanted to be the one to ask out loud. How do you cut into something that was never put together in the first place? Then the hull dimmed back to black, as if it had only paused to check that they were still watching. Vex's forearm plates clicked once, a small sound, barely audible over the hum of the chamber's captive star fragment far above them. "Run every diagnostic you have," he said. "I want an answer before the council convenes." They ran 47 of them before the hour was out, and Sorvath stood through every single one of them without sitting down, because sitting down felt absurdly like admitting the ship had already won something. Energy resonance imaging came back flat. Structural decomposition analysis came back flat. Quantum signature mapping came back flat, and then flat again when he made Farrick run it a second time, because the first result had looked too much like an instrument fault to be trusted. A confirmed, repeated, undeniable absence, no power source anywhere in the hull, no conduits running beneath the surface, no residual heat signature from 340 years of drift through the cold dark of the obsidian reach. Thermal bleed analysis was run twice as well. Every test, every single one of the 47, returned the same reading, and the reading was nothing. Not a null result from a broken sensor, not an equipment failure that could be dismissed and recalibrated away. Nothing that any Vorthani science recognized as a way to keep a vessel intact against radiation and vacuum and time. "It should not work," Sorvath said, to no one in particular staring at a screen that had run out of things to tell him. He had personally overseen the dismantling of propulsion systems belonging to 31 different civilizations across 4 decades of fieldwork. He had built his reputation on being able to look at any drive core, any reactor housing, any energy signature the Imperium had ever cataloged, and tell you within an hour how it worked and how to stop it. He had never once, in 247 years of life, been shown a machine that ran on nothing at all. A tech named Farik cleared his throat from the side console, the sound too loud in a room that had gone unnaturally quiet. "Sir, the vessel isn't heating at all under the scanning beam. It should be. Every material we've ever cataloged absorbs something when you hit it with that much energy." "Then, it isn't a material we've cataloged," Sorvath said. He did not like how that sentence felt in his mouth. It tasted like the beginning of an admission he was not ready to make, not in front of Vex, not in front of the junior analysts who were already whispering to each other by the far wall, their whispers louder than they realized in a room built to carry sound. Vex's chemical tell came off him before he spoke again, a thin note of burnt copper cutting through the recycled air, the smell he made whenever something threatened him and his voice refused to admit it. Sorvath had learned to read that smell over the years the way other analysts read a readout. It never lied, even when Vex did. "Then we open it," Vex said. "You should know, before this goes any further, that the Imperium had never been proven wrong about anything. Not once, in 9,000 years. Every species it had ever met, it had eventually understood, cataloged, and filed away into one of 12,000 entries in the deep archive. The breach team took 6 hours to cut a hole where no hull seam had ever existed, working with plasma torches calibrated for materials 3 times harder than anything they'd expected to face, and when they finally stepped through into the dark interior, no control surface glowing with alien instrumentation, no drive core humming behind a bulkhead, nothing that any of the 40-odd soldiers who went in single file had expected to find inside something shaped exactly like a ship. I want you to hold on to that fact while I tell you what happened next, because it matters more than anything else in this story. There was nothing waiting to explain any of it. No chairs, no corridors branching off into crew quarters or cargo holds. Built to the same rough proportions as a Vorthani long-range shuttle, just a single chamber, empty and silent, and at its center, a panel that had not been visible from outside the hull at all. It lit when the first soldier came near it. Thornek, the Admiral's second, a broad-shouldered officer with an old scar cutting through one brow ridge from some campaign decades past, leaned toward the screen and read the words aloud in a flat, careful voice. Sorvath watched the feed from the display room, standing close enough to the screen that his breath fogged the edge of it, and his claw stopped moving against the console entirely, mid-tap, frozen there. Because someone in that room had to be the one to say them first. "We observed your species for 34 years before first contact. We concluded you were using the wrong framework. This vessel is the first thing we made that you could see." Nobody in the room said anything for a long moment. Even the recycled air seemed to hold still. "Your species," Vex repeated slowly, each word landing like a stone dropped into water. "It's addressing the Vorthani." Sorvath's mouth had gone dry in a way he did not enjoy at all. 34 years. Watched. He ran the number against the Imperium's own first contact timeline in his head, the one he had memorized as a student 2 centuries ago and did not like where it landed. 34 years before first contact meant the humans had been observing the Vorthani Imperium quietly, patiently, long before the Imperium had ever known humans existed as anything more than a rumor at the edge of catalogued space. "Bring the ambassador," Vex said. Now, Thornek turned from the screen to relay the order, and Sorvath saw something pass across the man's scarred face before he did. Not fear exactly, but the particular stillness of someone recalculating everything they thought they understood about their own chain of command. His voice had not risen, not even slightly. It never did when he truly meant something. "Bring Vance," about their own certainty, in the space of a single readout. It traveled through council channels that had not carried an urgent human communication in decades, and Sorvath, watching the transmission log scroll past on a side terminal, found himself wondering how long it had been since anyone in this building had spoken to a human at all. The summons went out that evening, formal and sealed under Vex's own authority, demanding the human representative present herself at the Vorthan Prime Analysis Facility within 1 cycle, rather than simply filing reports about one. He stood alone afterward in front of the main display, the hull gone dark and unreadable again, cooling under the chamber lights like something that had said its piece and did not intend to say more until it chose to. His hands had stopped their old habit entirely, gone still at his sides in a way that felt foreign after 187 years of the opposite. 34 years of watching, 340 years of silence since. He turned the numbers over and over, looking for the seam in them the way he'd looked for a seam in the hull, and found none there either. Farrick approached carefully, the way junior analysts approach senior ones when they had something to say and weren't sure it would be welcome. Sir, should I log the panel's message under the standard reveal drop classification, or log it as what it is? Sorveth said, more sharply than he intended. He softened, only slightly. Log it as the first thing they've told us in 340 years. We don't have a classification for that yet. Farrick nodded and retreated to his station, and Sorveth was alone again with the dark hull and the weight of a question he did not yet know how to ask. He thought of his 1,200 published papers, stacked somewhere in the deep archives, endless records, each one built on the assumption that he understood, at least in outline, the shape of what he didn't yet know. He had never once considered that the shape itself might be the error, that the framework holding up every paper, every diagnostic, every confident briefing he'd ever given Vex or the Council might be sitting on ground that had already cracked without anyone noticing the sound. He did not yet know what question to ask. He only knew with the kind of certainty that had built his entire career that whatever he chose to ask first was going to be the wrong one. She wore a gray coat gone soft and pale at the seams from wear, the kind of garment that had been mended more than once by hand rather than replaced, and she carried a small metal thermos the way other people carried weapons. Close, familiar. Ambassador Elena Vance arrived at the facility 11 hours after the summons went out, and she did not look like a woman who had been rushed. Unremarkable to her, but somehow the only thing in the room that moved with any ease. She sat in the observation gallery without waiting to be told where. She unscrewed the thermos, she poured, she drank, she said nothing at all. Sorveth stood near the display wall with Farrick and 2 other analysts, watching her through the transparent barrier the way he might have watched a specimen, and felt uncomfortably that the watching was going both ways. Vex entered a few minutes later with Thornick at his shoulder, and even the Admiral's usual unhurried stride seemed to catch on the sight of her sitting there, unbothered, sipping something that smelled faintly of bitter roasted grounds through the gallery's filtered air. Ambassador Vance, Vex said, you know why you're here? I know why you think I'm here, she said. Her voice was low, unhurried, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment for far longer than 11 hours. Those aren't always the same thing, Admiral. Thornick stepped forward before Vex could answer, and Sorveth saw the burnt copper smell reach him even through the barrier's ventilation, faint but unmistakable, coming off both of them now instead of one. The Imperium has 12,000 years of technological record, Thornick said. You have had 340 of them to share what you know. You have shared nothing. That isn't true either, Vance said, and took another sip. You never asked. We are asking now. Thornick's scarred brow lowered. The vessel in your containment bay defies every law of physics my people have written. You will explain the technology behind it, or I will order the pacification of every human settlement within 40 light years. There are 12 of them. I will begin with the agricultural colony on Themis 7. 42,000 people. The number landed in the gallery like something physical, and Sorveth felt his own claw twitch against his side, an old reflex he could not suppress even now. Vance did not flinch. She set the thermos down on the low table in front of her, unhurried, the cap still loose in her other hand, and looked at Thornick with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite amusement, something colder and stiller than either. You're quoting numbers at me like they mean something I haven't already thought about, she said. The Veyron Accord grants every council species the right to withhold proprietary technology for a fixed term after verification. Humanity's verification finished a long time ago. We are well within our rights, Admiral. That right doesn't expire because you've grown impatient waiting for it to. You are citing procedure, Thornick said, at a soldier standing between your people and annihilation. I'm citing the law your own council wrote, Vance said. Sorveth had watched the Admiral face down warlords and rival commanders across a dozen campaigns without so much as a change in his breathing, and he had never once seen him look, even for a moment. The one you helped ratify. I didn't invent the rule that's protecting us right now. You did. Vex's jaw tightened, the plates along it shifting with a small dry click that carried in the quiet gallery. Like a man who had walked into a room expecting a fight and found the terms already decided against him. Then explain the vessel, Vex said. Explain what we found inside it. Explain the message. Vance's expression shifted then, something small crossing it, Gone before it fully arrived, not fear. Sorvith thought, watching closely. Something closer to relief, as if a weight she had carried a long while had finally been set down. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "We didn't hide it. We just let you assume. I want you to notice here that nobody in that room had raised a weapon. Nobody had fired a shot. And yet something enormous had already shifted in the space between one sentence and the next, and none of the Vorthani standing in that gallery had felt it happen. Nobody spoke for a long moment after that." Sorvith found himself replaying the sentence in his head, turning it over the way he'd turned over the panel's words the night before, looking for the trick in it and not finding one. "We just let you assume." "Assume what?" Vex said. And for the first time since Sorvath had known him, the Admiral's voice did not carry its usual weight. It came out thinner than he'd likely intended. Vance capped the thermos and stood, smoothing the front of her worn coat with one hand. "It's the one you've all been making for 340 years, and it was never true, not for a single day of it." She looked past Vex, past Thornick, and found Sorvath's eyes through the barrier with an unsettling directness. That silence meant we had nothing to say. That's the assumption, as though she had known exactly where he was standing before she'd walked into the room. "You're the analyst," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Dr. Kalen Sorvath," he said, before he could stop himself from answering. "You read the panel." "I did." "Then you already know more than the Admiral does," Vance said, "and you haven't said a word about it, because you don't yet understand what you're holding." She turned back to Vex. "There's someone you need to meet before this goes any further. He's already on his way. I'd suggest you have coffee brought up. It's going to be a long conversation." Captain Marcus Webb arrived with 4 members of his salvage crew less than an hour later, and none of them looked like soldiers. They looked, if anything, like tired engineers who had been pulled off a long shift, unshaven, dressed in patched work coveralls. One of them carrying a battered toolkit he set down by the gallery door out of pure habit. Webb himself was unremarkable in a way that struck Sorvath as almost deliberate, a plain, weathered face, gray at the temples, the kind of man who would not stand out in a crowd of 1,000. He walked straight past Vex without acknowledging the rank insignia at all, up to the containment window, and looked at the dark hull of the derelict for a long moment. "That's an old one," Webb said finally. "Model 7. We stopped making those a while back." Sorvath felt something cold move through his chest. "You have newer versions." Webb glanced at him, not unkindly. "We have different ones?" "Depends on what a place needs." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, its edges soft with handling, and held it up without offering it across. A world of brown and green, veiled in white cloud, oceans catching a yellow light. "That's Earth. We don't build ships there anymore, not really. We build the plans. The ships get made wherever they're needed." "Needed for what?" Thornex said, his voice low, and Sorvath heard, for the first time, something in it that was not anger. Webb tucked the photograph away. "For watching," he said. "That's what the vessel in your bay was for. It's part of something we call the Shepherd's Loom, been running 340 years now. 12 ships built exactly the same, sent out to sit quiet in places like the Obsidian Reach and wait." "Wait for what?" Sorvath said, and this time he could not keep the question inside him. Webb looked at him, and for just a moment something almost gentle crossed his tired face, the expression of a man about to hand someone a weight he knew they weren't ready to carry. "For you to finally come and open one," he said. "You took your time." Webb's next words came before anyone in the gallery had recovered from the first. "The framework," he said. "That's the part that's going to be hard to hear." Vex's chemical tell thickened, burnt copper cutting sharp through the recycled air now no longer faint. "Say it plainly. Human." Webb glanced at Vance, who gave him a small nod, and set his battered toolkit down beside him as if he needed both hands free for what came next. "Your Imperium built its whole science on a set of assumptions about how energy and matter relate. 9,000 years of it. Every reactor, every drive core, every weapon you've ever fielded. It works. It's always worked. That's what made you so sure it was right. It is right," Thornex said. "It has functioned for 9,000 years. So did a lot of wrong ideas for a while," Webb said, not unkindly. "We watched you for 34 years before we ever said hello. Long enough to run your own equations against a different model, one that gets you further. Faster. Cheaper in ways that matter over centuries." He tapped the side of his own skull. "Yours works. Ours works better. And the gap between the two only shows up once you've built something at the scale you've built the Imperium. Which is why it took you this long to notice. Sorvath's mouth had gone dry again, the same dryness from the night before, except now it came with a name attached. 12,000 years of records in the deep archive, 12,000 species catalogued, 43 systems absorbed and measured and understood, every last one of them, using a framework that a quiet, unarmed vessel had just called incomplete. You're saying our physics is wrong, Sorvath said. I'm saying it's a smaller answer to a bigger question, Webb said. You built an empire on the smaller answer. It held you up fine. It's just not what's actually underneath things. Vex's forearm plates clicked. Once, hard. Prove it. That's not really something I can do in an afternoon, Webb said, almost gently. That's the whole reason there's a loom. 34 years of watching wasn't enough time to explain it to you. 340 years of waiting wasn't about hiding the proof. It was about waiting until you were ready to ask for it instead of being handed it. Nobody in that gallery said anything for a long while after that. I want you to picture it, a species with 100 times the years and territory, listening to a much smaller species explain, without cruelty, that the ground under all of it had never been what anyone thought. He went to his private office 2 levels down, the one with the narrow window looking out over the facility's east courtyard, and he made himself a cup of tea he did not particularly want, the way he had every evening for as long as he could remember. Sorvath excused himself an hour later, not because anyone dismissed him, but because he found he could no longer stand under the containment window without his hands wanting something to hold on to. Because the ritual of it was the only thing left that still felt like his own. He drank it slowly. He set the cup down. He did not touch his console. It was the first time in 187 years that his claw had gone a full quarter hour without tapping against anything at all. There was a knock at the door, soft, almost apologetic. Farik stood in the frame when Sorvath looked up, holding a data slate against his chest like something he wasn't sure he was allowed to bring in. Sir, Elder Thessari has requested a private channel with you. Council priority. Sorvath had spoken to a Mavari elder exactly twice in his career, both times at formal council functions where she had said almost nothing and watched almost everything. He nodded, and Farik withdrew, and the console chimed a moment later with a channel request marked in the pale gold of council observer clearance. Her face resolved on the display, small and long-limbed even in the frame, skin thin as old paper, eyes that had seen considerably more than his own 247 years could account for. Dr. Sorvath, she said. Her voice was quiet, measured, each word placed like a stone set carefully into a wall. You read the panel? I did, Elder. And do you understand it yet? He hesitated. I understand what it says. I don't yet understand what it means. Something in her expression did not change so much as settle. The way water settles after a stone has already sunk through it. I was present for first contact, she said. 340 years ago. I watched the humans for 34 years before that, alongside my own people, because the council asked the Mavari to observe quietly before any formal approach was made. I do not believe you're ready to hear how not true it was, even now. The council convened 4 hours later, and Sorvath stood at the rear of the chamber rather than at his usual place near the display. I was the only vote against classifying them as non-threat. Sorvath's claw twitched, the old habit trying to reassert itself. Why? Because non-threat implies a species with nothing left to teach you, Elder Thessari said. I did not believe that was true then. Because he found he did not trust himself to speak, without his voice giving something away. Vance sat in the gallery with her thermos, refilled now, and Webb stood behind her chair with his arms crossed, watching the council members file in with the patient, unhurried expression of a man who had clearly done this before, on other worlds. Vex stood near the center dais, and beside him Thornick had gone unusually still, not the stillness of anger this time, Sorvath thought, watching closely, but something quieter, the stillness of a man doing arithmetic he did not want to finish. With other empires just as certain of themselves as this one. The council will hear the human delegation's full statement, the presiding officer said, regarding the vessel recovered from the Obsidian Reach. Vance rose. She did not carry notes. 94 cycles ago, my government authorized the retrieval of 1 unit from the Shepherd's Loom program, at your empire's own request, once your analyst breached its hull. That authorization included full disclosure of the program's purpose, on the condition that disclosure only proceed once the vessel had been physically opened by Vorthani hands, not human ones. Why that condition? The presiding officer asked. We learned that the hard way, a long time ago, with an empire that isn't around to argue about it anymore. The chamber went silent at that, silent enough that Sorveth heard his own pulse in his ears. Because a truth you're handed changes nothing, Vance said. A truth you dig for yourself changes everything, and it was in that silence that Thornek finally spoke for the first time since Webb had named the loom. How many? Thornek said, his voice low, almost hoarse. How many empires have you done this to? Before us. Vance looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face was almost kind. You're not the first, she said. You won't be the last. But you're the only one standing in this room right now, so I'd focus on that part if I were you. The chamber held its silence a moment longer, and then Vex did something none of the assembled council members had ever seen him do in 64 campaigns. He sat down. Not a collapse, not a stumble. He lowered himself into the nearest tiered seat with the deliberate care of a man testing whether his legs would still hold him, and he said nothing at all. Thornek's scales had gone visibly paler along his forearms, the old battle scars standing out dark against skin that had lost its usual sheen. Bring the panel here, Vex said finally, quiet. I want to see it again. All of us. They wheeled the containment cradle into the council chamber itself, an unprecedented breach of protocol that nobody objected to, and the panel lit the moment it sensed the room full of bodies around it, the same pale light it had shown the breach team days before. Sorveth stepped forward before anyone told him to. He had read those words twice already. He made himself read them a third time, aloud, because some part of him needed to hear his own voice say it in front of everyone who had built a career, a fleet, an empire on the ground this message was quietly pulling out from under them. We observed your species for 34 years before first contact. We concluded you were using the wrong framework. This vessel is the first thing we made that you could see. His voice did not shake. He was almost proud of that, distantly, the way a man notices something small and true in the middle of losing everything else. 1,200 published papers, 247 years of study. All of it built on an answer that had been smaller than the real one since before he was born. Nobody in the chamber corrected him. Nobody offered a rebuttal. There was, he understood now, nothing left to rebut. Watch him closely here, because this is the moment the whole empire finally arrived at. Not an explosion, not a war, a man standing in a room full of his superiors, reading 4 sentences for the third time, and finally hearing what they had said all along. Vance had gone quiet during the reading, her thermos untouched on her knee, and when Sorveth finished, she looked at him with something that was not triumph. It looked, if anything, like relief, the same expression she'd worn in the gallery days before. Thornek asked how many empires we've done this to, she said, into the silence. I didn't answer him properly. I will now, since I think you're finally ready to hear it without reaching for a weapon. Vex did not look up. Say it. You're not the first empire to build something enormous on a framework that was almost right, Vance said. You won't be the last either. What makes you different is smaller than you'd think. It isn't the size of your mistake. It's what you do in the room right now with the people who are telling you about it. She set the thermos down beside her chair. We didn't come here to conquer you. We came here to hand you the door and wait until you were the ones who opened it. That took 34 years of watching and 340 more of patience. We never once considered that a failure. I'd ask you not to either. Thornek's voice came out rough, quieter than Sorveth had ever heard it. You could have told us sooner. Spared us the... He stopped, unable to find the word. The certainty, Vance said. No, we tried that once, a long time ago, with a different empire. Handed them the answer outright. They didn't believe it until it was too late to matter. A truth you dig for yourself, standing in a room you built with your own hands. You can't. Elder Thessary's voice reached the chamber a moment later, carried through the council's open observer channel. A truth you're given, you can argue with. Quiet and unhurried the way it had been on Sorveth's private screen the night before. I voted against classifying them as non-threat. 340 years ago, she said. I was the only one. I want the record to reflect that it was never courage. I simply understood, watching them for 34 years, that a species patient enough to wait 3 centuries before speaking was not a species with nothing left to say. She let that settle before she continued. The Imperium did not stop being an empire today. It stopped being certain. I have watched 31 species meet their end without ever managing that second thing. I would rather watch you manage it than watch you meet the first. Vex finally raised his head. Something in his face had gone still, in a way that was not anger, not the old flat stillness of a commander refusing to yield something closer. Sorvith thought, to a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he'd forgotten it had a shape. "What do you want from us?" Vex said. "Now that you've told us." "Nothing," Webb said, speaking for the first time in a while, still standing behind Vance's chair with his arms loosely crossed. "That's the part people never believe. We don't want your systems. We don't want your fleet. We just wanted you to ask the question yourselves eventually. You did. That's the whole transaction." Sorvith returned to his office an hour after the chamber emptied, and found, without quite meaning to, that his hand had gone to the console to check the readings on the derelict vessel one more time. The hull sat dark in its cradle, cooled now, unremarkable, indistinguishable from any ordinary piece of salvage, except for the panels still glowing faintly at its center. He read it one last time, alone this time, no council, no admiral, no scarred second-in-command standing over his shoulder waiting for an answer he could not give. The words had not changed. But beneath them, where nothing had been before, a second line had appeared, so faint he nearly missed it, resolving only once the chamber's ambient light dimmed enough for the panel's own glow to stand out clean against the dark. "We hope you appreciate the craftsmanship." He stood there a long moment, tea forgotten on his desk, and understood, finally, that the craftsmanship had never been the hull, or the missing seams, or the silence that ran no power at all. The craftsmanship was the 340 years itself, the waiting, exact and deliberate, built to hold until precisely this moment and no sooner. His claw came to rest against the edge of the console. It did not tap. Outside the narrow window, the facility's captive star fragment burned on exactly as it had for 9,000 years, indifferent to what had shifted in the room beneath it, and somewhere far past the edge of that light. For the first time in 187 years, it simply stayed still, resting there as if it too had finally found the one thing worth not moving for. Farik knocked once at the open door, hesitated, and did not come in. Sorvith did not turn around. 12 identical vessels drifted quiet in 12 dark places, waiting, the way they always had, for someone else to finally come and open one.